Hello, 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 welcome back. Today is all about designing, making stuff, and we've been working our way through backgrounds, sort of tidying up the mess that is the backgrounds for 2024, but to be fair, I think backgrounds were not great in 2014 as well, and we are working our way through those and trying to make the best changes we can that you can implement into your game, and that's what today's all about. Okay, I'm going to put up a poll, so feel free to take part in that poll and share your ideas. Grab some food, some drink, make sure you're comfortable. This is probably going to take me a little while because we've got 2 backgrounds to do today rather than just one. And I'm certainly not going to try to do 3 just because it's just too much work. So let's just get into this. Settle back, let's get moving. Hi, welcome to How to D&D. My name is Fred Wheeler and today we're going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons. Modern Dungeons & Dragons. Dungeons & Dragons 2024, but also applies to Dungeons & Dragons 2014. Although maybe talking about beer and alcohol would be more fun. But no, we're going to look at the background for a bartender. There isn't a bartender that I know of currently in the game, so we're going to make one today, and we're going to make a STABLEHAND as well. But I know the bartender is probably right up there because getting pissed or pretending to getting pissed in a game is highly desirable by players. I've always found that to be the case. I don't expect it to be any different now. and I'm really quite surprised that nobody had thought about this. Like, why did not somebody write something down like it didn't happen in 2014 or 2024? What's wrong with people? Seriously. Anyway, I'm going to put forward, I've started the process. I'm going to show you a Google document, work my way through it and make the adjustments that I think I need to. But I'm going to ask those questions that you have, and that is, how would you build a bartender background for Dungeons and Dragons 5e or 5.5? For those of you who are calling it 5.5 or whatever the heck it is, I'm not sure anybody really knows. Or should I just say 2000? Look, I'll just say 2000 and 2014 or 2024. Question mark. Okay, let's put that question in there. Give you guys an opportunity to just chime in, see what you have to say. Right, let's get started, shall we? We've got limited time and we have work to do. So let's crack on in. This project is going to be in conjunction with Wally DM. I'll be sending this to him to get laid out and turned into a supplement. And we can't be that far off that, by the way. It's the 5th of February 2026. February, is that right? 2000, it's not 25, it's 26. Oh, I've spelled it wrong. 2 R's, I should have known that. Okay, so the first thing you'll notice with the backgrounds, and I've talked about this before, is I've moved the ability score improvement out of, for 2014, I've moved it away from species, and for the background, in 2024, they put it into the background. It is now optional, and it is now not related to any of that. It's not tied to your class, background, or species. If you're going to use it, don't attach to any of that so that it's not an optimization factor for people. The other thing is, again, another optional role, starting feats were included in 2024. They are not included in the backgrounds I present here. This is optional. If you're going to have origin feats, I wouldn't connect them to your backgrounds at all because it becomes another optimization thing, which means that the concept of creating a background that's more about flavor and what you did before you became a hero kind of gets lost, and that is a shame. Now, there are instructions on how I go about making custom backgrounds, which I've made available in the past, which is the background characteristics, your personality traits, flaws, your goal and your relationship, and then, of course, your skill proficiencies, which you'll get to, tool proficiency, Your languages are no longer in the species, are now in the background where I think they belong. And the background feature, which was very hairy-fairy and often not very good in 2014, I have tidied it up to include that basically you get advantage on a skill that you're proficient with that's related to that background strongly. Okay, so that's the concept behind that, and we're going to lean into that. I know that 2024 you decided to use feats, but as I have pushed that out and tried to make that not an optimization factor, it is not connected to these backgrounds. And then equipment is just 50 gold pieces worth of gear, provided it's not armor or weapons, because you weren't actually a fighter when you started out before you became your adventurer or hero, so you would have had other gear and equipment, and that's what that 50 gold is for. Okay, and we do make up packs, but anyway, so far we've done the acolyte, we've covered the artisan, we've done the athlete. These backgrounds look very different to what you're probably used to. The charlatan, we've got the criminal, and I know the charlatan and the criminal are very similar. We've done a doctor, we've got an entertainer, of course, because everybody likes the entertainer. The farmer, for those of you who want to be a farmer. The fisherman, fisherwoman. We've got the gambler, because of course gamblers are really popular too. The guide, the hermit, because the hermit, I don't know, is the hermit used that much? We've got the merchant, that's a very popular one, I think. The noble, and I know in my group it's definitely been popular. The sailor, of course, because pirates, sailors, very common, so we've done that one as well. The sage, scholar, which is a combination of a whole bunch of other backgrounds that I've connected together. And we're not going to deal with the wayfarer today. We're going to deal with the wayfarer. I'm going to cover what we're going to do with the wayfarer next week. Okay, and today we're dealing with the stable hand and the bartender. We're going to start with the bartender. I'll come back to the stable hand. Okay, all right. So an individual who makes and serves alcoholic and non-alcoholic drinks behind a bar. Nice and simple. There's our descriptor. We build from here. So our first criteria, if you'll notice, we don't need to worry about having a table necessarily to determine your personality traits, your flaws for your character, your goal and your relationship. We're going to leave that to the players to figure out, because they should be capable of doing that sort of thing. I think it was great in 2014 that they were interested in giving you some examples, but really, if anything, personality traits should have just been a table of 100 different personality traits. Roll randomly if you can't decide what you want to pick, you know. Same with flaws. Goals, I feel like goals could be a random table, but often goals are things that players tend to sort of grab onto themselves. So this is pretty standard for all the backgrounds that I build. I'll leave it very much up to the players to determine those 4 factors, okay? And for those of you who are wondering what the heck is this all about, well, the reality is that, you know, personality traits obvious. A flaw is basically a weakness. The flaw is really no different to what it was before. The goal is really the ideal. The ideal is, I just think the word goal is a better indication of what ideal used to mean. And then relationship or loyal relationship is your bond. And I think the word relationship is probably a better indicator. Okay. Skill proficiencies. I think probably one of the most common skill proficiencies that we probably need to consider is primarily the most important is persuasion. If you've ever been a bartender, and believe it or not, I'm actually a trained bartender. Well, I was. And I did work in a restaurant as a wine waiter for a while, and occasionally worked behind the bar when the main bartender wasn't there. But persuasion is probably, you know, communication is really a huge factor. Not so much deception, although I'm going to say that there is a bit of deception that goes on when you're a bartender. It's just the nature of it, unfortunately. Intimidation doesn't usually come into it that often, but it can if things get messy. I do remember knives being thrown around the kitchen when I was working in the restaurant. And investigation and performance. So there is a factor of, like presenting yourself and putting on a face. And I think performance sort of is a good indicator of all of that. So let's just go through the skills to make sure I have locked down the things that are most important. So athletics is probably not a factor. Acrobatics, no. Sleight of hand. The way that sleight of hand is structured, it is really not doing what we would... I mean, if you're thinking, spinning bottles and so forth, sleight of hand's really not that. If you're thinking that's what sleight of hand could represent, we should include that as well. And I hate to say it, that's not really what sleight of hand is used for in Dungeons and Dragons. Because if you look at how it's worked, it's basically manual trickery and legmancy. But the things that it gives across is what you would be doing is stealing money. That's not what you're going to do as a bartender. Or picking a pocket. Well, it's picking a pocket basically in sleight of hand. It's I think it's a dex check. Whatever, if you're going to think, I want to do spinning bottles and tricks with mixers and so forth, that's more like a dexterity check, really. But I don't think that is the key factor that makes you a bartender, because that's just one type of bartender, frankly. So let's lean into the things that are important. Stealth, again, I don't think that's important whatsoever. And then Arcana, History, no. Investigation is an interesting one. The reason I put down Investigation for the bartender is that there are times where you have to make decisions. You have to deduce and decide if what you're about to do is the right thing to do. That's often about whether you continue giving somebody drinks. But also, I guess it's about, because you're doing a lot of measuring. If you're making up a specific type of drink and it's not just serving beer or wine, I would say investigation is probably something that's coming into that. But it's more around making those decisions based on what you see, whether it is a safe or sensible thing to continue selling drinks to somebody. So that's kind of the reason why. But I can see if you feel that this would be inappropriate, that taking it out would be fine. Nature and religion, no. Animal handling, no. The people you're serving drinks to are not animals. Insight, I'm going to ignore, as I don't even think it you could say it should be insight, Fred. You should be including insight. I'm leaving that alone. I think it's a terrible skill in the game. So it's better to flush it or just bury that nonsense. Medicine, no. You're not really going to be doing that sort of thing. Perception is the super skill. Never put super skills. If they want that, pick it up in your class, but not in your background. Survival, no. Now, deception, yes. We used to have to trick people to get them to buy more drinks. There are strategies and ways of doing that. That sounds terrible, but that is just the business. Intimidation usually came down to when you weren't getting people, when people get rowdy and out of control, sometimes it was necessary to be very forceful in your manner. And you might even wind up getting into a tussle. That happen. If you were lucky to have bouncers, that's great, but that doesn't always happen. And then performance. So I think these are the ones for our skills that we need to consider. But this is unquestionably, being able to communicate with people is probably the most important thing. Next, tool proficiency. It's a no-brainer. I would go with brewer's supplies. Now, it's not so much that I'm putting down this particular tool proficiency because you're going to be brewing and making alcohol. But one of the things that you certainly do wind up doing is you learn how to make alcohol and how to handle it. And I think this is the only tool that really even makes any sense whatsoever for a bartender. There's nothing else would really tie into this. Did I do home brewing myself when I was a bartender or was training to be a bartender? No. But did I assist somebody else in the brewing of ginger beer? Yes. I'm in New Zealand, so sometimes buying your own alcohol is too expensive, so you make your own. Okay. Languages, common, so they can talk to anybody, and one language of your choice. So it's nice and standard, and there's nothing too crazy about this. Next, Artisan feature. Now, it's not an artisan feature. We want a bartender feature, something that's related to the bartender. Bartender feature. You have advantage using brewer's supplies for ability or skill checks. Now, brewer's supplies is probably the wrong thing. Do you know, honestly, I think the one that you want to lean towards is probably persuasion or the brewer's supplies. So I'm going to put in or. Persuasion or brewer supplies for ability or skill checks, and I'm going to give them both. I don't think that brewing using the brewer supplies is going to come up that often, but I think that's probably the most sensible one to include. Let us just go over to, because one of the things you'll discover very quickly is, like, you know, most people who deal in, if you are selling alcohol or you're serving alcohol, the chances are that you have, like, the vast majority are they're drinking quite a lot themselves. It's not a good practice, but it happens. Let's just see if I can find what I was looking for, which is the brewer's supplies. I don't know if we've got a rundown on what the brewer's supplies are in this book, and I might have to go to a different book, which I will do because I want to make sure I get this right. Okay, so I need to go to, I think it's going to be Xanathar's Guide to Everything, brewer's supplies, and we'll have a look at how that sort of functions. Here we go. Tool proficiency 78. Okay, so brewer supplies. Okay. Brewing is the art of producing beer. Okay, not only does beer serve as an alcoholic beverage, but so brewing is not just beer. People, alcohol can be made. You can make wine. You can make spirits, but the process of brewing purifies water, sure. Crafting beer takes weeks of fermentation, okay, and wine, and only a few hours of work. That's true, depending on how much you're making. Anyway, components. Brewer supplies includes a large glass jug. Well, if you're a bartender, you're going to have one of those anyway. Plenty of them, probably. A quantity of hops. Okay. A siphon and several feet of tubing, and a large supply of sugar. Frankly, for those of you who haven't figured that one out, fermentation requires a lot of sugar. Anyway, history. So they've got skills here: history, medicine, persuasion, and potable water as things. So brewer supplies detect poison or impurities in a drink. DC 10. Identify alcohol. DC 15. How do you identify alcohol? Smell? Taste? Ignore effects of alcohol. Yeah, good luck. Just because you've got brewer supplies does not mean you're going to be able to ignore the effects of alcohol. So I would say kind of some of the, particularly that last one, is some of the stupidest fucking shit I've ever heard. But given that we're dealing with people who are game designers, maybe these ones don't drink that much and understand that. Anyway, moving on. History. Proficiency with the brewer supplies gives you additional insight on intelligence history checks concerning events that involve alcohol as a significant element. Oh, good Lord. Okay. All right. Interesting. Strange, but interesting. Okay, medicine. This tool proficiency grants additional insight when you treat anyone suffering from alcohol poisoning or when you use alcohol to dull pain. So I can assure you that your ability as a bartender to treat somebody with alcohol poisoning is no better than anybody else's. Because when you get trained to be a bartender, they don't treat you and teach you how to deal with what sort of medical practice do you put in place outside of basic first aid? So a complete load of bullshit again. As for knowing about historical events or concerning events involving alcohol, it's, I suppose, persuasion. This is far more important. Here we go. What have they written? A stiff drink can help soften the hardest heart. Your proficiency with brewer's supplies can help you ply someone with drink, giving them just enough alcohol to mellow their mood. Okay. All right, so the more I see this, the more I think that, I am open to giving you both brewer's supplies advantage and persuasion. I'm actually fine with that. Does that sound like we're giving them more than we've given other backgrounds? Yes, but I don't think the brewer's supplies are going to come up that much, whereas the persuasion, like that, could come up a lot, whereas this, very rarely is this ever going to come into, is it going to affect your game significantly? Probably not. So I think their sort of rundown as to how this works and how persuasion would work with regard to a bartender. There are some key things that I would say persuasion would be related to with bartender. One, and I don't want to specify them specifically, just an ability check or a skill check related to them, and to make it nice and broad. And that is one, just starting up a conversation. Persuasion is kind of around that. It's just getting to know them, getting them on your side, making friends. Like, yeah, it's a big part of being a bartender. I would say things like getting them to agree to buy another drink. Like, you often spend a lot of your time trying to convince them to buy another drink. That's why I say persuasion. Whether that's special coffees, beer, wine. If they don't, the last thing you want is somebody sitting at the bar drinking water. So persuasion in terms of buying another drink is another thing. But also there's the fact that when they've drunk too much is saying, look, it's time, you need to go home. You're really, you've had more than you should probably have, and you're starting to lose your ability to function. Can I call you a taxi or get you a ride, or is there somebody who can take you home? Like, that is a big factor in terms of a bartender. That's all persuasion again. And then, then there's other skills that come into it, but let's again lean into persuasion. Persuasion is the catch for all of this. It's probably the most important thing. If I had to select one or the other, persuasion or brewer's supplies for the bartender, I would delete the brewer's supplies in terms of advantage, and I would keep persuasion, because persuasion is the skill. It's not dexterity checks to swing bottles around or so forth. A lot of that nonsense you just don't have time for, and too much breakage. Owners of bars do not like you doing that unless it's a performance bar. Okay, next. Equipment. Common clothes. I think we're going to have to push our common clothes up to a different level. That's probably not going to be sufficient. Just because I know every time I ever came to the restaurant, the expectation is you dressed really well. Like, people going out, there is an expectation that you dress for the occasion. Even in some of the lowliest of bars, you'll find usually the bartender, people working service, are probably dressed in much better clothing. So we're going to go with clothes fine clothes. Fine clothes, that means, and then brewer's supplies and any money that's left over. So I don't know that, do I need to go through all these things? Okay, so let's go through the gear and see if there's anything that sort of pops out outside of the brewer supplies that you might have. I'm just trying to think of what there might be the only thing I can think of, and I don't know that this is going to apply to your fantasy world, is there was definitely a requirement to have a tie clip. So your tie, if you're wearing a tie, did not fall into the drinks. The last thing you want is your tie to be hanging out over the front of you as you're leaning forward. And it's dangerous, right? It's not just for an office when you're shredding paper. Abacus, no, not really. I don't think so. Acid, no, absolutely not. Alchemist fire, Ammunition, no. Antitoxin, no. We never store. Look, bartenders do not have an antitoxin to deal with the fact that you got sick. You couldn't afford it anyway. You just send them. They just have to go to the doctor. Arcane focus, no. Backpack, no. None of that. Barrel, no. You don't carry barrels around. Basket, bedroll, none of that. Bell, no. You don't usually have a bell. Blanket, block, tackle, book, glass, a glass bottle, no, not really. Buckets, caltrops, candle, no. I don't know that there's any of this. I'm thinking because I've actually been a bartender, what we used to be required to have. Do you know, I've just realised what we required. This is sorry, a dummy's waiter, which is a corkscrew. Sounds weird, eh? We were always required to carry a corkscrew. It is not on the adventuring list. I'm not going to consider it as costing money. But a corkscrew was a huge thing. I remember getting into trouble for not having a corkscrew actively available. You always kept one in your pocket. Okay, corkscrew. What else was there? If I write down wine, yeah, corkscrew is probably the easiest way for you to remember that. So we'll just put that down. Everything else doesn't really apply because you've kind of got what you need. Yeah. You certainly wouldn't carry a whistle. The last thing you want to be doing is blowing a whistle in a bar. Too many people are going to get very annoyed with you. Okay, so that's it. So fine clothes comes to 15 gold. We're not going to worry about the corkscrew because it's probably worth next to nothing. Brewer's supplies is how much? Brewer's supplies is 20. Okay, so that's 35. 35, so 15. $15 pieces. So let's structure this in a similar way we've done a lot of the other ones. I don't know why I've done this that way, but I have for some reason. Come on. There we go. Copy. Alright, so let's drop this in. Paste. And this is obviously option A. So you don't have to figure it out yourself. Fine clothes, brewer supplies, corkscrew, and pieces. So that's that. GP. We'll just go GP for now. And then the last option is option B, which is this. Option B. Yep, A or B, pick one or the other. There we go, that's the bartender. So let's go and see what people have to say about the bartender, see if there's anything that they feel I've left out. I'm sure there's a few people who may have served drinks in the past that are in the chat. Here, I believe we have some people who know a bit about this sort of stuff. Here we go. Hello, witness protection. How's it going, Fred Hubert? Let's have a look. What have you got here for me? It's more like being a juggler. Yeah, and to be fair, the last thing they're really, you know, unless it's a performance bar, which there are very few and far between, the last thing the owner wants is you juggling bottles or drinks at the bar because there's always a breakage. It's just a matter of time for juggling. Yeah. Half the players want their PC to own a bar, make them buy it. Yeah, but again, like they just work there. This is what this background's all about. I 3D printed a full bar with brewery and distillery. Fred Hubert, that's hilarious. Ah, dear. Okay, we made up an entire system of house rules in second edition for Herbalist. Yeah, so I didn't put the herbalist kit for the bartender because it's not really appropriate for how it's sort of envisaged. Alchemy, mix, brewmaster. Yeah, again, a bartender doesn't do a lot of making beer, although they can. They're more likely just mixing drinks or serving drinks, right? Can he give him a direction to the pizza place? Okay. All right, what else have we got here? A second magic item, given one of my PC's sword. I am against... All right, you're against alcohol. No combat effects. No, you'll notice that the backgrounds do not have combat effects in here. I do that deliberately because really remember, the background is what you did before you became a hero, a fighter, an adventurer, before you developed fighting skills. And for those of you who are saying, bartenders have fighting skills as well because they might get to fight. No. The last thing that they want you is fighting somebody in a bar. D&D designated driver is the horse. Yep, probably. Player's intelligence goes down, horse's wisdom goes up. I have a tabaxi NPC bar owner. No glassware, metal mugs. Interesting. Okay, all right, so that's... Well, I think we've addressed that question pretty well. You guys are hilarious in terms of your responses to that. So I think we'll keep it the way that I have designed it. And the the investigation aspect of it, which might have thrown a few people, I'm gonna keep it in. This is the first draft. It can come out later. If you guys think no, it's not really that. Performance, intimidation, deception, all good, but investigation just seems wrong. I understand, but for now, I'm going to leave it there. I like making our backgrounds a little bit flexible with a little bit of option stuff to sort of pick up, still within the theme and the narrative that we're working with. So that is that one. We're going to work on the stable hand next. And I think the stable hand is another one where nobody really has done it. I don't think I've seen the stable hand in 5e anywhere, which is kind of strange. So, hashtag, how would you build a stable hand background for Dungeons and Dragons 2014 or 2024? Okay, how would you build a stable hand background? Okay, I've typed the same thing in twice. Hang on, give me a sec. Here we go. All right, let's start working on this one, shall we? Let's get the stable hand done. Can I just say that the stable hand proficiency in scooping poop? Thanks, Fred. Fred is a patron and a moderator, for those of you who are wondering. Okay, so an individual who works in a stable carrying out general maintenance, general stable maintenance, grooming, feeding, and caring for horses or other animals. So it won't necessarily be a horse. It might be a camel, it might be donkey. Heck, maybe you've got elephants in your stable. I don't know. You decide. Maybe you've got axe beaks. Maybe you've got some ostriches. Maybe it's full of cows. I don't know. Whatever, you decide. Your game. Anyway, so that's how we'll structure it for our narrative. We just need to renumber this because this is numbered incorrectly, isn't it? That's better. Okay, so first off, our stable hand. So background characteristics, they're going to pick, decide on their personality trait, their flaw, their goal, their relationship. Pretty standard. Don't need to do very much with that. Next, the skill proficiencies. What's the skill proficiency we should have? For sure, animal handling. That is not an option. And then I'm going to select one of the following. So you see each skill proficiency set up. There's two, but sometimes you get one that's tied very heavily to the background and it's not a choice. Rather than tying two, I like the idea of giving you one that leans heavily into it and then maybe giving you some options around something else. And select one from the following. Now I've put down athletics, acrobatics, and nature. So let's have a look at the skills that we've got and see if this seems right. I need to have a lozenge. Sorry guys, my voice is going to break on me otherwise. Okay, so first off, athletics. Now the reason I put down athletics as one of the possible skill proficiencies you could pick up as your selectable option is because it's a very physical job sometimes. You know, it's animal handling, you say, oh, riding, but just maneuvering animals around. There's a lot of strength required because you're moving hay, you're moving, bales quite often. It is a very, very physical job, quite exhausting, depending on the level of work required. So that's why I put athletics, is around strength. The next one I've got here, acrobatics. And the reason I've put down acrobatics is, yes, animal handling's for handling animals and maybe riding and stuff like that. But you have to be quick around animals. Animals can be really unpredictable. I think the first time I ever rode a horse was on Rangitoto Island, which is Rangitoto Island, and it's just out. It's in sort of the Gulf or Bay of Auckland, Hauraki Gulf, and Rangitoto Island has horses on it on the back, and I was riding with somebody else because I couldn't ride a horse, and so a lovely lady, she's very pretty. Definitely outside of my league. I was too young. But I'm riding on there and we're riding along the beach and I'm on the back with this very pretty lady who knows how to handle a horse. And then, like Xena, she stands up on the horse and I'm like, what the fuck, am I in a movie or something? And then leaps and does some sort of barrel roll shit onto the sand. And I did not understand what was going on, and she did not communicate to me what was going on, and probably because she didn't have enough time to respond, but she could have warned me before, because then the horse rolled on me. And then she told me after the fact, and I'm seriously shocked that I did not get seriously injured. Well, guess what? She told me, oh, my horse likes to roll around in the sand. That's why I jumped off. I should have told you beforehand, but I forgot. And I'm like, fuck, you got to be kidding me. So, yes. And they can kick you. If you walk behind them, sometimes they will kick you if they're in a bad mood. You've got to be very careful. They will step on your feet. They're not necessarily trying to do it, but sometimes, depending on their mood, and maybe just by accident, they're heavy animals, horses, and a lot of anything in a stable is probably like, an elephant, be very heavy. You can imagine that's going to be painful. Acrobatics feels like a very, very sensible thing to be doing. And that one event in my life, and a couple of times where I've seen riders have to leap off their horses, has convinced me that acrobatics should be something you pick if you had the choice. Sleight of hand is not suitable for what we're talking about here, so no, you're not stealing from the horse or the animals. Stealth is not really a factor. There's no being stealthy on an animal or with animals. Arcana doesn't make any sense. History doesn't make sense. Investigation doesn't really make sense. You're not a vet. You're a stablehand. Nature, yes, does. Because nature falls into a lot of different categories, right? When we look at the skill nature under intelligence, if I can just find it now, what does it say about nature? Your intelligence. Checks measures your ability to recall lore about terrain. Terrain is a factor with animals for sure. Okay. Plants, animals, weather, and natural cycles. The fact that it includes animals is really, like, we've got animal handling and we've got nature, so animals and animals. So it makes sense that it should be animal handling and nature, but I wanted to make it open to athletics and acrobatics as well. Okay, you decide, you make those picks, but I think that's probably the best way to structure that for that aspect of the background. Next, I'm doing a lot of talking, sorry. Tool proficiencies. Select one from the following. This is where it gets tricky. Like, what is a suitable tool proficiency for somebody who's a stable hand? Because Alchemist Supplies makes no sense. Brewer's Supplies doesn't. Calligrapher Supplies doesn't. Carpenter's Tools is not really appropriate. Cartographer's Tools, no. Cobbler's Tools, no. Cooking utensils, you're not going to be doing a lot of cooking. Glass blower, jeweler, a leather worker, no. Mason tools, painter's supplies, potter's tools, smith's tools, tinker tools, none of this. Weaving tools, wood carver's tools. None of this is really the stable hand in terms of a tool proficiency. So then we get down to disguise kit and forgery kit, and it doesn't make sense. So I actually put in game set as an option. I guess the reason I selected game set, and I think I should say just all game sets or one musical instrument, because it's sort of a throwaway. What are you going to do with it? This is one of those times where I feel like a background is being created by me, where I'm going to give you a tool proficiency, which is maybe just a too fluffy, but there isn't really anything else. Herbalism kit is not appropriate at all for a stable hand. Musical instrument, I suppose you could say you play music to the animal to keep them, calm. I never really saw anything like that. Game set, they're kind of throwaways, really. Navigator's tools, poison kit, thieves' tools, vehicles, land or water. None of this makes sense. So, which is why I'm kind of putting down a game set or a musical instrument. And let's just go with that. I know it's not the best, but unless they improve the selection of tool proficiencies, I don't know what else I could put there. So I'm not going to say this is the best design here, but it's the best I can do. At least you get a choice. You've got a couple of choices. I mean, they're not great choices, but there's something, right? They're kind of throwaway, and they don't feel like they relate in any way to being a stable hand at all. I'm very much aware of this. Languages. You gain common and one language of your choice, pretty standard. I do this with all the backgrounds. Give you an option and make sure you can communicate with everybody else. This is not non-negotiable. The stable hand feature. You have advantage on animal handling checks. It isn't going to be anything else. It is just that. There's not going to be a tool proficiency. It's about the animal. If you're not really good at handling the animal, in other words, you're not proficient with the animal handling skill and you don't have advantage, why would I be building this in the first place? So that is why I've put them there. That being said, this gets tricky. Because now I've got to lean into how do I build the equipment for this. And that might be a bit more difficult to actually do, but we'll do our best. I think what will wind up happening is because you've potentially got proficiency in a musical instrument or a game set, I'm going to have to make sure I leave enough money at the end for you to be able to pick up your musical instrument. And some of the musical instruments are the biggest problem, if you decide you want to have a lute, proficient with a lute, they're 35 gold pieces. It's really expensive. So I need to really have about 35 gold pieces available for you. Game sets aren't a problem. So whatever gear I give them, I have to make sure that they have about 35 gold pieces left at the end so you can pick up potentially that musical instrument if that's the way you go. So that's how I'm going to build it. This is going to be entertaining. So, because I'm not going to put down the game set or the musical instrument that you select, that's what your 35 gold pieces will be doing. So I have to be very frugal with what you get as a stable hand. There's a couple of things that you would normally have as a stable hand, but it's often gear that is provided with the stable, so you don't necessarily have it. So we'll see if this works. Abacus, no. Acid, no. Alchemist fire, absolutely not. Antitoxin, can't afford that. We'll give them a backpack, because I'm pretty sure most stable hands had some sort of bag for carrying their gear. Next, when they came to work, ball bearings, no. Barrel, basket, bedroll. We'll give them the bedroll because it's cheap. And I am aware of a few people who stayed with animals and they would have a sleeping bag and would sleep on site. Not necessarily in the stall with them, although I have heard of that happening. It's not a safe thing to do, but it can happen occasionally. Blanket, block and tackle, book, no. Glass bottle, no. Bucket, no. Because usually you had the buckets already. Like you could say, that's part of your gear. No, probably not. You didn't have a bucket that you carried around. Candle, no. Candles and fire around stables, bad idea. Those are all usually part and parcel tied to the stable itself. Chain, chalk. Chalk wasn't really something that you carry, if I remember right. No. Chalk, I don't know a lot about this sort of stuff. I know a little bit, and that's only from other people. Climber's kit, obviously not. Chest, no. Clothes, you want to have the most common clothes because they're going to get absolutely carcoed. So common clothes. You did not dress fine for this sort of work. It's nice and cheap. It's 5 silver. So we're still within our budget. Component pouch, you're not a spellcaster, so forget about that. Crowbar, absolutely not. Fishing tackle, no. Grappling hook, hammers, sledgehammer, healer's kit. A healer's kit, yes. I would say that. Healer's kit. I'm going to put that one down. Just because you suffer injuries, but so do the animals, and you can do a lot with a first aid kit, believe it or not, even one that is designed for humans. Holy water, no. Hourglass, hunting trap, absolutely not. No ink. You're not going to be ink is not a thing you'd be doing. I'm not going to give them a lantern or lamp because that's usually owned by the stable themselves. You don't really need to have that. Manacles, magnifying glass, mess kit. I don't know about mess kit. I think no. I think mess kit, yeah, because you didn't usually, no. I mean, the other thing we've got to remember is the stable hand is kind of the person who might look after the horse while the other adventurers go and do their thing. But that's not what we're doing. I'll leave it for now. Oil, absolutely not. Paper, parchment, perfumes, no, you don't worry about smell. Pitons, you just get used to it. Pots, potion of healing, no. Quiver, ram, rations. You can buy that if you want to. I'll let you leave. I'll sort that. I'll leave that to you. Rope, hemp. Yes, rope is a factor. I think we're going to go with this cheap rope. Rope, hempen. Just because of the amount of times that you wind up using rope. You use rope for everything with animals. So let's include that. Rope, hemp. I would like to give them silk rope, but it's just too expensive. I think it's going to wind up being too much. Well, maybe we can change it. We'll see. A sack. Sack is super cheap. We could put a sack in there. Sacks are a big factor. Sack. We'll give them a sack. Sealing wax, scale, sealing wax, shovel. That's part of the signal whistle. I'll give you the signal whistle anyway, just because I find most people who ever sort of signaled animals, they use their fingers rather than actual whistle. But let's put a whistle on there. You usually don't like to use whistling because that scares animals. Tinderbox, torch, vial, water skin. And we'll add in the water skin as well. So you've got a few things. Okay, so let's just add that all up and figure out how much I've just spent and see if we have hit our target for this. Okay, first off, the backpack cost me 2 gold. So 2 plus bedroll, which is 1 gold. 1 gold. It's not very much so far. Common clothes comes to, where is it? Common clothes is 5 silver, so it's not even a gold piece. Let's keep going. Healer's kit is 5 plus 5 gold pieces for the healer's kit. I know that. Our hemp rope. Where's the hemp rope? Rope. Hemp rope is 1. Plus 1. It comes to 9. Okay. Here's our rope. We've got a sack, was 1 copper. It's not even worth worrying about. The signal whistle, I think, is 5 copper. Again, not really worth worrying about. The water skin is 2 silver. So maybe another gold piece for the other bits and bobs. Plus 1. It comes at 10. So we've really got about 40 in gold. And that might well be sort of all we need to worry about. I think we're going to go with 40 gold, and loosely, that's probably what your stable hand has in terms of gear. Or you just use your 50 gold and you get whatever the heck it is you want. And just do it that way. I think that's probably the easiest way to build this. The other thing I wanted to add in here, sorry, where is it? I can't think of a stable hand that didn't have a brush. What do they call it? A grooming brush? At least having 1 grooming brush, but often they had multiple grooming brushes. But a grooming brush. It's pretty common. I would really like to add in something like saddles and bits and so forth, but is that really necessary? Let's have a look. Bit and bridle. Saddles can be quite expensive. Saddlebags. Well, it's not going to be barding. Let's give them the bit and the bridle as well. Bit and bridle. So where are we? BBB. Bit and bridle, which is another 2 gold. So we just trim this down to 38. Okay. A saddle, a pack saddle is not a riding saddle. A riding saddle is much more expensive. I would like to include a riding saddle as well, but it's so expensive. It would then, but which is more important? Having a lute musical instrument or having a saddle as a stable hand in terms of your gear? You know, I'm going to do it. I'm going to put riding saddle. I think that's probably far more important. Riding. A stable hand does a lot of riding. You're riding horses around. You're not just pulling them by guiding them around by reins, or a rope. Yeah, I think that's probably about right. Okay. That kind of defeated what I was trying to achieve before, but backpack, bedroll, bit and bridle, common clothes, grooming brush, which worth probably nothing, like 1 copper, not worth counting, healer's kit, riding saddle, rope, hemp, sack, signal whistle, water skin. I mean, I could take some things off there to get it back to 35, so you could have the loot potentially, but I don't think I'll do that. I think we'll leave it at that. I think that's where we'll work with this. This is how I'll structure it. I think those are probably the most sensible things for you to have as a stable hand. Okay, well, let's go over and have a look what you guys have had to say. Since I've done the best I can with what I had to figure out how to do this. Curious as to see what you have said. Okay, so Fred Herb is talking about scooping poop. Yeah, animal handling is a no-brainer. It has to be that. So witness protection, there's a reason why skill proficiencies or proficiencies in languages I haven't stipulated as Elven, Dwarvish, or Gnomish. And why I always structure it the same way. I say common and you select one other. Because you could have, you know, maybe you're from an Orcish culture and you speak Orc because you were in that culture and you were speaking that language, but you also know common and you look after animals. Or maybe you're from somewhere else. Like, I don't think it needs to be as narrow as or select Elven, Dwarvish, or Gnomish. So that's why I've made it very open. It's deliberate on my part, frankly. I think a lot of the cultural aspect of your character is in your background, not in your species or in your class. That is where the cultural aspect of your character might rear its head. So that's why I leave the language side of it very open, because that's a very cultural thing. But anyway, shovel and hay fork. Again, those are things that are probably part of the... Like if you're going out on the road with an animal, you're not going to have a shovel and a hay fork with you. Do you know what I mean? You might have a very small portable trowel, possibly. I mean, I can put down a small shovel if you like. Where is it? Small shovel. But it will be so small that it's probably worth like a couple of copper. Pretty much nothing, which isn't actually in the player's handbook, right? Can read Dwarvish, Gnomish schematics for a wagon. Ah, dear. Hello, Carl. Is that Carl Herman Fries? What's Osler? You have to explain that to me. Okay. Parasite avoidance training. God. Pitchfork. Yeah, but again, that's part of that's owned by the stable you're working at. You don't normally have a pitchfork that you carry around with you if you're going off site. He or she can at least put a horseshoe on a horse. Yeah. I mean, true. But even a stable hand, like often I found that they would look after the hooves, but they wouldn't put the horseshoe on because it was a tricky process without doing damage to the feet. And so they would get somebody specialised and trained to do that, even if it wasn't, it wouldn't be the stable hand necessarily. But once they'd come through and removed nails and so forth, and the horseshoe, they might clean up the feet. They might do that job. You know what I mean? And then once the hoof is healed back up, they put a new shoe on. They could be like a squire to a knight, but the reason why witness protection I'm not making it a squire is because it leans into the idea that you're already a fighter, or fighter in training, which is a mistake for a background. It's like having a background that is the folk hero. So your folk hero background, the reason it shouldn't exist and it's been removed is because you're already a hero before you become a hero. It's the most bullshit nonsense under the sun. And frankly, when people try to pick up guard or soldier, it's another bullshit background. So basically you're saying you were a fighter, adventurer, soldier, combatant before you even became a combatant. No. Yeah. Your level 1 character, when it picked up one class in the fighter, that's the squire. Not before that when you got the background. That's where it should be working out. Squires also need to care for weapons and armor. Yeah, it's a little different in terms of how a squire works. It sounds like a farmer who's a specialist in horses. No, it sounds exactly what a stable hand normally does. I've known a few, and these are the things they do. It's very, very common. Yeah, rope for the halter. Yeah, for sure. I didn't really know it was called the halter, but when I had to lead horses round, so I did a lot of work with disabled riding, or riding for the disabled, and yeah, you definitely. And they usually don't have enough people to lead the horses, so you wind up having to do it yourself. So they usually give you if you're not something that you're very skilled at, or you don't do a lot, they usually give you the nicer horses, the older ones too, which is a little bit easier. Anyway, so I'm going to finish up this and this poll. Do you want a bartender background in your Dungeons & Dragons 5e game? Yes, 62% out of 8 votes. We got 8 votes today. Nice. No, 12%. Somebody doesn't. Undecided, 13, and just watching 13. Okay, all right. So the thing about backgrounds is you don't have to include them in your game, and you don't need to select the background bartender if you don't want it. Same with Stablehand, frankly. You know what I mean? So yes, I think we've established all of the sort of the key things they need to have, and yeah. So there's our stable hand. The stable hand I'll put onto my Patreon at the end of the week, probably on the weekend sometime. Sunday for me, whatever day it is for you and whatever country you're in. It'll probably be a Sunday for me in New Zealand. And then of course the bartender will go up as well, along with all the other backgrounds. And then next week we're going to finish up. We're going to do, next week we're going to deal with the detective and the spy. And there's a bit of crossover between the spy and the detective. They are still different to a certain degree. So now people had asked me to do a background for a prisoner and a slave, and I'm going to tell you why I can't. And I want to go full screen. I want to make it really clear to people, if you're really unsure as to why I'm not providing that. About languages, I often have merchants know sign language because it is usable by those who can't speak. Yeah, absolutely, Carl, for sure. This is why I think with the backgrounds, it's good to sort of say, look, we're going to give you common so you can talk to pretty much everybody who knows common. And a lot of people will know common, or whatever the dominant language is in your world. And then the other one you get to pick. That's where you get to control sort of how the culture might be different for your particular background compared to another background. Because culture is language, correct? Okay, let me explain to you very quickly, and then I'm going to finish this live stream up here, why I can't do a background for a prisoner. Let's just do this. Why you can't make a prisoner or slave background. So let me explain it to you. Let's get rid of this for a second and get in close so it's nice and clear. It is not because I don't want to make a prisoner background, okay? If I thought I could do it, I would. It is not because I don't want to make a slave background, because if I could, I would. It is not because I am concerned about somebody trying to cancel me because I start talking about slavery on YouTube or on my YouTube channel, because I don't give a fuck. I think people need to talk about slavery because it still exists now. The problem with creating a background that revolves around slavery or prisoner is this: ultimately, anybody can be a slave. It doesn't matter where you come from, just about. And anybody can be a prisoner. So when you look at your background and you're trying to come up with how do I make a prisoner or a slave background, like your background characteristics, you can pick whatever personality trait, flaw, goal, or relationship you want. It could be anything. That's the same with all the backgrounds that I've been doing. That's not the problem. Is there a specific skill proficiency that you would possess, two that you could select, or we could just give you two skill proficiencies that are related to being a slave or a prisoner? No. Because potentially anybody can be a prisoner or a slave. And it's not defined by skill proficiencies. So it would basically read something like this, and this is why I can't do it. Skill proficiency, select two from the following, and that basically have all the skill proficiencies available. You know how I've talked about in the past, we have to be careful about creating the unicorn, whether that's a class unicorn or a species unicorn or a background unicorn, where you give them too many options that it becomes the only background that somebody will select because it gives you all options. So it would look like that. Skill proficiency, select two, and you can select from all the different skills, because there's no definable skill for a slave or a prisoner. There just isn't. There isn't. Okay? They're not defined by that. It is just a process of circumstance, or just really unfortunate, unfortunate nature of the society you're working in or operating in. And then tool proficiency. What tool proficiency relates to a prisoner or a slave? It would read, select one of the following, and you would just pick from all of them. Again, it's the unicorn problem. Languages is fine. It would look like all the other backgrounds. You get common and one other of your choice. That's fine. What would your slave or prisoner feature look like? I have advantage on what? One skill or tool proficiency that is gained by my background. It is, again, the unicorn, because you can have any skill or any tool proficiency, because you're not defined by that. Your equipment, if you're a slave or prisoner, it might be you have no equipment whatsoever if you're a slave or a prisoner. Or it's basically going to read like, well, it could be anything. So just spend 50 gold pieces on whatever you have for your slave or your prisoner. But it's much more likely going to read like, you have no gear. I can't make that background. That is that would be the crux of insanity. I work with people who have mental illnesses. I'm trying not to adapt them myself and incorporate them into my own behavior and the things that I create and make. So I would never want to create a unicorn background for you to use, and I don't recommend that you do so. So it is not because I don't think that you can't have a character that is a slave or a prisoner, but it should not be a mechanic tied to your background, where you have a background that is the slave or the prisoner. Instead, if you want to have a character that is a prisoner or a slave, select your background or create a custom background that is not the unicorn. Select your species, select your class, and then just say that you're either a prisoner or a slave if it's related to the campaign you're playing in. And it works with the game master, the dungeon master, and the other players playing with you. That is the best way to adopt and deal with a character being a prisoner or a slave. Never tie it to the mechanics of the game. It is a mistake, okay? It has to be fully narrative, because there is nothing that defines what a prisoner or a slave is, since anybody can be these. If I remember correctly, Oslar may be a misspelling for a young stablehand. Oh, is that right, Carl? Okay. Oh, well, that's good to know. I didn't realise that. And of course, okay. Okay, all right. Got it. Okay, so witness protection. I have a background for your cartographer. I do. Because you're thinking about making maps, right? You wanted something that around the cartographer, being a mapper, correct? That's what you were looking for to have. And I made it. It's done. We've already done it. It just may be called something you weren't expecting, but it does exactly probably what you want, okay? The Wayfarer is kind of trying to do that, but I think the Wayfarer is kind of a bit lost. There's another one that's called Sage, but that's more around calligrapher's supplies, right? But when I was looking at how the backgrounds could be condensed down to the bare minimum and just have a wider sort of appeal, the best one that you want to use is this one. We did this a few weeks back, maybe even a month or more back. Okay, so Carl, is it? I think it's Carl, or is it Wisdom Protection? I can't remember. This is the one you want. This is the background. An individual that leads, directs, or provides information to navigate land-based locations or environments. So not the sea, but land. Okay. And they get tool proficiency in cartographer skills. Their skill proficiencies is nature and survival. And that's very much leading into the idea that, you know, if you're a cartographer and making maps, you're going to be doing a lot of journeying. It's like a surveyor. So this is the background that you want, okay? Your guide feature, you have advantage on ability or skill checks when navigating. Because if you're a cartographer, you'll need to navigate. So this is the background that you probably were looking for, okay? This is what that will do, without specifically making a map-making background. If you don't feel this quite matches up with what you want, that's all right, because there's a custom background with instructions very specific on how to go about making a custom background, because that also needs to be an option. It's very clear how you would structure it. It's a no-brainer, so you do not need to worry about me making it, or anybody else, frankly. For those of you who haven't figured out, I am very much about you making your own stuff. The only reason I'm making these samples for you is because I know people expect there to be some samples so that I don't have to think about all this stuff. I mean, it's taken me half an hour to an hour, probably about an hour's work, maybe an hour and a half's work, to figure out how to create each background and make it sort of work. And the custom background took me a lot longer to figure out, but that's all right. That's why I'm doing this in the first place. So if you wanted a background that's around being a cartographer, I believe it's the guide. At least that is the base structure I would use. Okay? Anyway, we are done. I will be back next week and we'll deal with the spy and the detective. That'll be fun. I'm sure it will. So huge thank you to everybody who's been watching and listening. Big thank you to everybody who took part in the poll. I really do appreciate it when you take part in the poll. Gives me an idea of where people's heads at. I'm not necessarily going to only focus on those sorts of things, but it certainly gives me some insight as to what's going on. And huge thank you to all of my paid patrons who support me on Patreon, because without you, I just wouldn't be able to do this. I wouldn't be able to live stream. I would probably just disappear and look after my veggie garden and just work out in the gym. And that would be the end of me. You know, you wouldn't hear from me anymore. Prepare, Cook and Survive, thank you for being here. Witness Protection, thanks for your feedback and your comments. Really do appreciate it. Carl Herman Friends, oh God, I butchered your name, Carl, I really have. Fred Huber, thank you for being here as well. Really do appreciate it, and your feedback and your ideas. Yeah, look, wherever you are in the world, whether it be the morning, the afternoon, or the night. Please look after yourself, your family, and your friends. Okay? Be nice to your neighbours. Go and make your own stuff. I've given you all the tools. I've shown you how to do this. You can make your own stuff and make it better than Wizards of the Coast or anybody else. Okay? You can make your own stuff. It's not as hard as it might seem. You'll be all right. Until next time, keep rolling those 20s.